At 3:47 a.m. on March 12, 1943, Lieutenant David Richardson was positioned in the sonar room of the destroyer HMS Starling, observing a strange pattern on his screen. The water was 4 degrees Celsius, the wind cut like blades, and in the depths of the North Atlantic, something was moving. Something large, silent, and lethal. It was a German U-boat, and by all normal standards of naval warfare, it should have been completely invisible at 180 meters deep. Richardson adjusted the controls for the third time that night, disbelieving what he was seeing. The image on the sonar screen was too sharp, too precise. During 2 years of war, he had chased ghosts in the ocean, vanishing echoes and targets that dissolved into nothing. But this was different. This was real. And there were more. Much more. The chances of sinking a German submarine in the North Atlantic were brutally low, almost impossible. The British Royal Navy had to launch an average of 287 depth charges for every U-boat destroyed. 287 underwater explosions, tons of TNT poured into the ocean, all to perhaps, just perhaps, damage a single submarine that you could barely detect and never track with precision. The mathematics was brutal, and every sailor knew it by heart. Each escort ship carried between 50 and 100 depth charges. This meant you had, at most, 2 real chances to sink a U-boat before running out of ammunition. 2 chances against an enemy that could dive to 230 meters, silence its engines, and simply vanish. The German commanders of the Kriegsmarine knew this perfectly. They had meticulously studied every limitation of Allied sonar, mapped every blind spot, and timed every interval between detection and attack. They developed specific tactics to exploit these weaknesses, openly mocking primitive British technology in reports intercepted by Allied intelligence. A document captured in 1942 stated, "British sonar is like a blind man shouting in the dark. We always know where they are before they know where we are." But on that frozen March morning, something different was installed in the hull of the HMS Starling. It was something the best German engineers considered theoretically impossible to build. Something that violated the basic principles of underwater acoustics as the Germans understood them. Admiral Karl Donitz, supreme commander of the German submarine force, upon hearing the first rumors from British prisoners, dismissed it with absolute disdain as the English rubber ducky, a mocking reference to a harmless and ridiculous child's toy. It was a transducer capable of hearing the ocean in a way no human, no military equipment, ever had before. Richardson whispered the coordinates to the gunnery team on deck. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from pure adrenaline. 6 depth charges were prepared, set to a detonation pattern that no naval warfare manual described because it simply had never been possible before. Launch. The first depth charge cut through the air and plunged into the darkness of the Atlantic. 15 seconds. 20. The explosion occurred exactly at 175 meters deep, so precise that Richardson himself doubted it for a moment. The second charge followed 3 seconds later, detonating at a mathematically calculated point. Then the sonar caught something terrible, a sound no sailor ever forgets. The unmistakable sound of metal being crushed under extreme hydrostatic pressure. It was like hearing a tin can being crumpled, but amplified 1,000 times, reverberating through miles of water. The U-boat's hull was imploding. 50 meters below the surface, air bubbles and debris began to emerge. Diesel oil. Pieces of wood. Fragments of documents. And then, absolute silence. A German submarine, detected with surgical precision, tracked through evasive maneuvers, and destroyed in less than 8 minutes from first contact to final sinking. Something that never, in 2 years of brutal war in the Atlantic, had happened before. Richardson looked at the sonar screen, then at Captain Walker, who watched everything from the bridge. Walker simply nodded. There were 6 more contacts on the screen. And the night was just beginning. What happened over the next 6 hours would forever change the Battle of the Atlantic, reverse the balance of power in the most contested ocean of World War II, and lead to the sinking or neutralization of 15 German submarines that never saw the attack coming. For the first time since the war began, the U-boats were not hunting Allied convoys in the depths of the Atlantic. They were being hunted. And the hunt had just begun. The project for that equipment had started in September 1940, in a small room of the British Admiralty in Bath, when the situation in the Atlantic was becoming desperate. That month, German U-boats had sunk 59 merchant ships, totaling 295,000 tons of vital cargo lost. September 1940 was called the happy time by U-boat commanders, a time when targets were so abundant that submarines often returned to base with torpedoes to spare. The fundamental problem of anti-submarine warfare was apparently insoluble. Conventional sonar, called ASTIC by the British, worked by emitting a single pulse of sound that traveled through the water until it hit something solid and returned as an echo. It was effective, but had a critical flaw that every experienced U-boat commander exploited. The submarine could detect the sonar ping before the surface ship detected the submarine. It was like hunting in the dark using a flashlight that makes a loud noise before it turns on. You shout "Where are you?" and wait for the echo, but meanwhile, your target already knows exactly where you are and has time to move, dive deeper, or simply disappear. Worse still, conventional ASTIC had blind zones. Between 50 and 100 meters deep, sound waves would scatter in water layers of different temperatures, the thermocline, creating perfect acoustic shadows where a U-boat could hide. The theoretical solution was elegant but apparently impossible to implement: make the sonar emit continuous sound waves at multiple frequencies simultaneously, creating a three-dimensional acoustic net that mapped the ocean constantly, without pauses or blind zones. But this required processing thousands of simultaneous echoes in real time, filtering oceanic noise and distinguishing a submarine from a school of fish in fractions of a second. The initial response of the British Admiralty was clear and unanimous: technically impossible. The signal processing technology simply did not exist in 1940. Analog computers could barely perform basic artillery calculations. Furthermore, continuous sound waves would create destructive interference, making the equipment completely useless. But Professor Frederick Brundrett, a 38-year-old physicist at the Admiralty Research Laboratory, would not take impossible for an answer. Brundrett knew that if a solution weren't found quickly, Britain would lose the war through slow strangulation. Ship after ship sunk until there was no more food, fuel, or ammunition reaching the islands. His team worked for 22 months in absolute secrecy in underground facilities near Portland. They developed piezoelectric crystals capable of transmitting and receiving sound waves on 14 frequencies simultaneously. They created electronic filters using hundreds of thermionic valves that separated true echoes from oceanic noise through a process Brundrett called differential harmonic analysis. The system used a paradoxical principle: instead of trying to eliminate interference, it used it. Sound waves at different frequencies created unique interference patterns when reflected by moving metallic objects, the exact profile of a submarine. It was like creating an acoustic fingerprint that no U-boat could mask. The result was officially named ASTIC Type 147B, but the Royal Navy gave it a deliberately misleading codename, Squid. The name was chosen because squids use water jets to move, something completely unrelated to the actual technology. If documents were captured, spies would look for the wrong technology. The device consisted of 3 depth-charge launchers mounted on the deck in a triangular pattern, connected to a revolutionary sonar system that automatically calculated the target's position, exact depth, speed, and direction. But the truly revolutionary component was mounted on the hull below the waterline, an underwater transducer the size of a dining table that emitted sound waves in a pattern so complex it appeared random to any observer. In reality, it was a precise mathematical sequence mapping the ocean in 3 dimensions, creating a real-time acoustic image of everything moving in it, from schools of fish to icebergs and German submarines. In November 1942, the destroyer HMS Ambuscade was secretly equipped with the system for tests against the British submarine HMS Seraph. The commander of the Seraph, Lieutenant Commander Norman Jewell, was ordered to use every known evasive tactic to avoid detection for 6 hours. The results were devastating. 5 simulated attacks. 5 perfect detections in less than 90 seconds each. 5 kills calculated with a precision of less than 5 meters. In one attack, the Seraph was sitting on the bottom at 165 meters with engines off, the most effective tactic against conventional sonar. The Squid system detected it in 34 seconds. Jewel surfaced and sent a single-word message, "Impossible." The Admiralty authorized immediate production. But absolute secrecy was critical. The Squid would be installed only on ships operating in the North Atlantic in waters deeper than 2,500 meters, ensuring that any sunken ship would take the secret to depths no recovery equipment of the time could reach. The Germans could never know what was killing their submarines. Commander Peter Gretton personally supervised the installation of the first 12 Squid systems in January 1943. The process took 8 days per ship and was done in dry dock under canvas covers with 24-hour armed guards. Technicians signed oaths of secrecy under penalty of immediate court-martial. The HMS Starling, under the command of the already legendary Captain Frederick John Walker, was the first to receive the full equipment. Walker was 45 and considered the greatest anti-submarine warfare expert alive. In 18 months, he had sunk 11 U-boats using only conventional tactics and a nearly supernatural understanding of how submarine commanders thought. But Walker knew conventional tactics were failing. In 1942, German submarines had sunk 1,664 Allied ships. Britain was being systematically strangled. If the trend continued, defeat would be inevitable by the end of 1943. When Walker first saw the Squid system installed on his ship, he said nothing for 40 seconds. He simply watched the technicians calibrating the frequencies. Then Walker turned to Lieutenant Richardson, his sonar officer, and asked one question: "Is this real? Does it work as they say it works?" The response was a simple nod. Walker smiled. It was the first time his crew had seen him smile in months. He then gave an order: "Find me a U-boat. Any U-boat. I want to test this before someone changes their mind." On the morning of March 12, 1943, he would have his chance. And the war in the Atlantic would never be the same again.